All right, let's do it. Time for a deep dive into Kishore Mahbubani.
Oh, yeah.
This is going to be fun. We've got his book, Can Asians Think? And then a whole bunch of essays you sent my way.
Yeah, a good collection.
So before we even start, tell everyone, who is this guy?
Well, he's not just an academic,
Right.
sit in some ivory tower.
Yeah.
Mahbubani was actually in Singapore's foreign service.
Oh, wow.
And he was dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy.
Okay.
And he even writes, for all the major publications.
So this is someone who knows what he's talking about.
Right. He's got that theoretical background, but also a ton of real-world experience.
So we're not getting abstract ideas, we're getting frontline insights.
Exactly.
That's what I'm excited about. So reading through all this stuff, what really jumps out at you? What are the big themes?
A lot of it is about global power, how it's shifting. And of course, you got to start with that title, right? Can Asians think?
Yeah, it's a real attention grabber.
It is super provocative, obviously.
Right, yeah.
I think he's, challenging this idea we have in the West that we're intellectually superior, He's not saying Asians are smarter,
Right.
but that they're coming at the world from totally different perspectives now.
And those matter.
And those matter a lot. He really makes you rethink some assumptions.
Yeah, and what I found interesting was how he talks about, Asia's history.
Oh, yeah.
They were dominant for centuries, intellectually, economically. I mean, they were way ahead of Europe.
Exactly. And he uses that history to show that Asia's rise today.
Right.
It's not a fluke. It's almost like a return to normal.
A correction.
Right. But then, of course, something happened in the 19th, 20th century.
Right. The West took the lead.
Yeah.
So how does he explain that shift?
Well, he points to a few things.
Yeah.
Colonialism, obviously.
Disrupted
their systems, stole resources. But then also stuff happening within Asian societies.
Oh, interesting.
Like this decline in learning, innovation, they kind of turned inward for a while.
So they missed out on some of the big leaps forward.
Right. The Industrial Revolution, the scientific advancements, all that. But now, he says, there's this resurgence happening in Asia.
Right. Economies
Economies are booming. Their confidence is way up. There's this renewed interest in their own cultures, their heritage.
Almost like a reawakening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's playing out on the world stage in a big way.
And that brings us to another point he keeps making about democracy.
Oh, yes.
He says, Western-style democracy might not be the best fit for every developing country.
It's controversial for sure. He's not anti-democracy.
Right.
But he thinks in some cases, you got to prioritize good governance, getting the economy going.
Okay.
Then you can worry about political freedoms and all that.
So it's different paths, different priorities.
Exactly. Different paths to development. Yeah.
Acknowledging there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
And that's a big theme for him. But then this is where it gets really interesting.
Oh.
He argues that the West might actually be becoming, get this, decadent.
Decadent. Okay, I got to hear more about this.
He's basically saying, the West is too focused on internal stuff,
Okay.
too complacent, while Asia's charging ahead, hungry for success.
Oh, so he's saying we've lost our edge, our drive.
It's almost like that, and he's not afraid to say it, which is pretty bold.
That is bold. And it doesn't stop there, right?
Yeah.
He gets into some, shall we say, sensitive topics.
Oh, yeah, things like human rights, freedom of the press.
The hot button issues.
Where he really challenges what we think we know.
Yeah. So what's he saying?
Well, on the media front, he's super critical of how the West portrays Asia, saying there's a lot of bias, selective reporting, only focusing on certain narratives.
Yeah, I see that.
And then on human rights, he basically says, look,
Yeah.
the West doesn't have some monopoly on this stuff.
Right.
He thinks the concept gets used selectively, often to suit Western interests.
Interesting. So it's like a double standard.
Exactly. And it forces you to rethink some assumptions you probably hold without even realizing it.
Yeah, he makes you question things.
And he uses this one example a lot, Singapore.
Oh, right.
This tiny little country that's become an economic powerhouse.
They're killing it economically.
Yeah. But they also have strict laws, limited political freedoms.
So it's like a paradox.
Total paradox. And that's what he's so good at, presenting these paradoxes that make you think.
Is that the model? Is Singapore the model for other developing countries?
He doesn't say that explicitly.
Right.
But he puts it out there as a case study, hey, look at this. This is challenging what you think you know.
Yeah. Different path, different outcome. All right, we are just getting started.
Oh, yeah.
This is fascinating stuff. Buckle up, everybody.
There's a lot more to unpack here.
We'll dive deeper into these examples, these case studies.
Absolutely.
Get into the specifics.
Where it gets even juicier.
So stick with us.
So one of the things he talks about is the Asian financial crisis back in 97.
Oh, yeah.
It was huge, right? Like everyone thought it would cripple Asia for years.
I remember that. It felt like the whole region was going down.
But he points out, most Asian economies, they bounce back pretty fast.
Really?
Yeah. They learned from it, reformed their systems, came out even stronger.
So it wasn't just about the recovery itself?
No.
But about how they handled it, what they learned.
Exactly. And he contrasts that with what he sees happening in the West.
Okay.
Which is this growing rigidity.
Oh, interesting.
This inability to adapt to the changing global landscape.
Like we're clinging to the old ways.
Yeah, clinging to outdated economic models, political systems.
Even social values.
And even social values. It's like we're trying to fight the future instead of embracing it.
Yeah, I see that.
And he thinks that's going to make it tough for the West to compete, with Asia setting the pace.
Right, because they're adapting, we're kind of stuck.
That's the idea. But, we were talking about those human rights issues earlier.
Right, freedom of the press, all that.
So he doesn't shy away from it. He acknowledges there are legitimate concerns about some Asian countries, for sure.
Right.
But he's also critical of how the West uses these concepts to, criticize developing nations.
While ignoring our own problems.
Exactly. It's like, hello, pot calling the kettle black.
The hypocrisy.
Yeah. He points out, colonialism, the West doesn't have the best track record.
Not at all.
So he's not condoning abuses, but he wants a more, nuanced approach.
More context, less judgment.
Yeah, exactly. And he also goes after the Western media, saying they tend to focus on the negative stories.
Poverty, corruption, all that.
Exactly. While ignoring the positive stuff that's happening.
Like they're perpetuating stereotypes.
Totally. He thinks this kind of reporting just reinforces, Western superiority.
And maybe even justifies some interventions that shouldn't happen.
That's his argument. He wants a more balanced approach to global engagement, basically.
Recognizing the complexities, the different systems.
And he keeps bringing up Singapore to illustrate this.
Right. Tiny country, huge success story.
And he's not afraid to say, look, their government, many in the West would call it authoritarian.
Strict laws, limited freedoms.
But their economic growth, their stability.
It's impressive.
It is. He's not saying everyone should be like Singapore.
Right.
But it's a case study, right? Yeah. It challenges our assumptions about how development works.
Hey, maybe there are other ways to achieve success.
Exactly. And maybe the West should be open to learning from them.
Instead of dismissing them.
Yeah. It goes back to that idea of multiple paths, no one-size-fits-all solution.
So, this ties back to that big question, right? Can Asians think?
It's not about, IQ points.
No.
It's about recognizing that there are different ways of seeing the world.
Different approaches to solving problems.
And the world needs to be ready to engage with those.
On a level playing field.
Yeah. Can we move past those old power imbalances? See solutions coming from unexpected places?
Can we truly have a multipolar world where power's more evenly distributed, different viewpoints are valued?
That's the big question. And he doesn't have all the answers.
Right.
But he gives us this framework for understanding what's happening, what it might mean for the future.
And one of the big things he focuses on is, of course, China.
Oh, yeah.
This is a major theme throughout his work.
He sees China's rise as this, pivotal moment in history.
And it's not just about their economy.
No, it's about their growing influence, their geopolitical strategy.
So what's he saying about how they're playing the game?
He thinks they're playing the long game. Building relationships, being super strategic.
And not just throwing their weight around.
No. He actually argues their diplomatic skills are, surpassing the U.S.
Wow, that's a bold statement.
It is, but it's Mahbubani. He's not afraid to say what he thinks.
So is he worried about this? Or does he see it as a good thing?
I think he sees it as a natural progression, Asia returning to a more dominant role globally.
Like a correction, almost.
Right. And he thinks the West needs to adjust to this new reality.
Not try to resist it.
Exactly. The world's changing, power's shifting.
And that presents both challenges and opportunities.
And the key, he says, is dialogue, cooperation.
Learning from each other.
Yeah, it's not about a clash of civilizations.
It's about finding common ground.
And working together to solve these problems we all face.
Climate change, pandemics, all that.
Exactly. That's the message he's trying to get across, and it's super relevant today.
More relevant than ever, maybe.
All right, so we've covered a lot here.
Aw.
But I'm still curious to hear about some of the specific examples.
Oh, yes.
The case studies he uses to really drive these points home.
He's got a knack for picking examples that make you think.
Oh, he does. Remember the SARS outbreak?
Back in 2003. Yeah, that was scary.
It was, and he uses it to show, first of all,
Yeah.
how interconnected the world is.
Right.
Like a health crisis in one place.
It spread anywhere.
Exactly. But then he also criticizes how some Western countries responded.
Oh, how so?
There was a lot of fear-mongering, discrimination against Asians.
Which probably made things worse.
It did. He's saying, look, we got to be careful about letting fear and prejudice cloud our judgment.
Especially when dealing with something like a global health crisis.
Right. And this applies to more than just health issues, he argues.
Makes you think.
It does.
Yeah.
His work is full of these kinds of insights.
Challenging us to see things differently.
To question our assumptions.
To be more informed.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about Mahbubani's big ideas, his historical context, the criticisms of the West. But I think it's the specific examples. Those are what really hit home.
Oh, for sure.
Like you were saying before about the SARS outbreak.
Right, back in 2003.
Yeah, a real turning point.
It was, and he uses that to highlight a couple of things. First, how interconnected the world is.
Right.
You know, a health crisis over there.
Becomes everyone's problem pretty quickly.
Exactly. You can't just isolate yourself.
Nope.
But then he also uses it to kind of criticize how some Western countries responded.
What do you mean?
Well, there was a lot of fear, a lot of discrimination aimed at Asians.
Which probably made things worse.
Oh, definitely. It hindered the efforts to contain the virus. And it goes back to that.
To that double standard.
Exactly. He's saying, you know, we got to be careful about letting our own prejudices get in the way.
Especially when we're dealing with something global.
Right. A health crisis, a pandemic,
Yeah.
anything like that. Makes you think about how we frame things, you know.
Oh, totally. Like in the media.
Yeah, the media.
We were talking about that earlier, how he criticizes the Western media's coverage.
Oh, yeah, he gives some really specific examples of that.
Oh, like what?
Well, he talks about how, for instance, you know, a country like Indonesia, they'll focus on the economic struggles.
Right, which are real.
They are real, but they'll ignore the progress in, say, education or healthcare.
So it's not the whole picture.
Exactly. It's cherry-picking the data to fit a certain narrative.
And that can be really dangerous.
Oh, it is, because it shapes public opinion.
It influences policy.
And it keeps those harmful stereotypes alive.
Prevents us from seeing the nuances.
Exactly. And again, it reinforces this sense of the West knows best.
Which ties back to, like, the democracy argument.
Yes.
He's saying, hey, it's not the only way.
And he uses Singapore for that.
Right. That little powerhouse.
Yeah. They're doing amazing economically. They're stable.
But their
Political system.
Not exactly what we'd call a free democracy.
Not by Western standards, no. But it works for them.
It does. So he's not saying everyone needs to copy Singapore.
No.
But he's saying, look, there are other paths.
Different ways to get there.
Yeah.
Different values, different priorities.
And that diversity is important.
It is. Because the world is changing. The balance of power is shifting.
It's not just an economic thing anymore.
No, it's cultural, it's ideological. New models are emerging.
Challenging the old order.
And the West needs to adapt, to learn, to evolve.
Otherwise, we're going to be left behind.
That's the point he's making. He's not just criticizing to criticize.
Right.
He wants a more balanced world, more equitable.
Where everyone has a voice.
And we work together to solve these big problems.
It's a powerful message. So what are we supposed to do with all this?
Well, he doesn't give us like a step-by-step plan.
Right.
But he gives us this framework for thinking about things.
For understanding the complexity.
Questioning our assumptions, you know, being aware of how the world is shifting.
Engaging with people from different backgrounds, different cultures.
Exactly. Be informed, be open-minded.
Be ready for a future that's going to look very different from the past.
That's the call to action. What does this all mean for you? That's the question he leaves us with.
Yeah. What does it mean for our lives, our careers, our future?
It's time to start thinking about that. Because the world's not waiting.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. Really got me thinking. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for tuning in to the Power Book of Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join our growing community. Click the bell icon so you never miss an update. We have so much more inspiring content coming your way.